Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. Way back at the very beginning of this podcast, I recorded an interview with Steve Roud where he explained a little bit about the index, so please head back to that introduction episode if you're unsure what the Roud Index is. We're now into the second half of Season 2, and this is Episode 6. This week's song is Roud 16, The Frog and the Mouse. Later on, we'll hear from singer Jess Arrowsmith, but for now, let's have a look at the history of the Frog and the Mouse with one of our regular In the Roud contributors, Steve Gardham. Well, hello, Steve Gardham. How nice to see you again.
Hello, Matt. Lovely to be on again.
Yeah, this is your first appearance in this season. But yeah, we had you twice last season, didn't we? We had you on for the Three Ravens and for The Cruel Mother.
Yep.
And this is your first of two appearances in this season, so great to have you back. How are you? How have you been since we last heard from you?
Yeah, no problems. Very, very busy working on the new book, but hopefully get that out before Christmas. Yorkshire songs.
Excellent. We need, well, not need, but we all want more books of folk songs out there in the world. It's a growing thing, and I've already filled my bookshelves. I need to buy some more shelves.
Me too.
Yes, I've just come into a possession of not only a complete set of Pills to Purge Melancholy, but also issues of the EFTUS Folk Music Journal 1939 to 1938 to 1959. So that's the rest of a shelf full of folk song journals.
There ain't a lot in them, though, as regards song. The earlier ones are the better.
Yeah. But, you know, I'm a bit of not a hoarder, but I do like to have physical things.
Completist.
Yeah, I try to be. It doesn't always work, but, you know. Right, you said we've got a lot to get through with this week's song, so let's dive straight in. We're now in the second half of this season, and it's Roud 16, which is The Frog and the Mouse. What's the song about, first of all? What are we dealing with in terms of subject matter and plot?
Well, the story, there are variations on the story, of course, of such a long-lived song, but the basic premise of the song is you've got the frog who goes out courting a mouse, of all things. You know, where does all this come from? A mouse mixing up with a rat, with a duck, with a frog, and, you know, all this. There are various theories as to how this has come about, but they are just theories. So the story, you know, the frog goes courting the mouse. She, in most versions, has to ask Uncle Rat. A mouse has an Uncle Rat, or a landlord rat in some cases. And then they decide, Uncle Rat gives his consent, and they're going to have a big wedding feast, and they have this wedding feast, and various guests or uninvited guests turn up at the wedding feast. We get sometimes a cat and a kitten who cause havoc and bite everybody to bits, and the frog runs off across a lake, and the mouse runs up the wall, or the rat runs up the wall. All sorts of crazy things going on. And usually the froggy swims home across the brook and is swallowed up by a duck. And that's about it, basically. For one of the most popular songs there's ever been, and that is the crazy story.
Yeah, that's bonkers. Maybe that's the reason why, for its longevity.
Yeah.
So you just said that one of the most popular things. It was really popular and widespread, and I know we did say briefly before we started recording that this is international, a lot of American versions. This is a really popular song, then.
Oh yeah, all over the English-speaking world, at least. Yeah. I'm not aware of any foreign language equivalents, which you often get with the older songs, but I'm not aware of any with this one. I mean,
Okay.
obviously, it'll have been translated into other languages, but often our child ballads, for instance, have equivalent ballads in Scandinavia and on the continent, and that isn't the case with this one, I don't think.
Right. But certainly, um, certainly England, Ireland, and America
In Scotland, yeah.
and Scotland. Okay, good. Yes, great. That's we'll come to that later on, I
Very
suppose.
important. You missed out the Scotland, which is the earliest
Oh,
reference.
right. Okay. Well, that was me teeing it up then. How far, unwittingly teeing up the next question. How far back can we trace this song? What, as far as we know, is the earliest known sort of printed version?
Well, I mean, everybody who ever knows anything at all about the song knows that it goes back to 1549. The first mention is in the Complaint of Scotland, which was written in 1549. And in there, it's described as an old song, even then in 1549. So it's these old shepherds who are hanging about, and they've got some mermaidens. I meant to look that up actually. It doesn't. I can't. You can't possibly mean mermaidens, but these mermaidens, and these shepherds are having a bit of a hoolie, and they're singing and whoever wrote Complaints of Scotland has sort of written a list of what songs they were, and one of the songs is the frog came to the mill door. The frog came to the mill door. And we're pretty certain that that is the same. This is our song because some of the not some of the songs that were came to light not too long after that had a similar sort of title. So we're pretty sure it's the same song.
So 1549. That's, I think, in terms of what we've covered on the podcast, that's the furthest back we've gone.
Yeah. Well, there's not much. You can take a few. You can take. Now what's the other one I've been researching recently? Oh yeah, the Fox and the Goose. That one goes back even earlier into the 15th century. But apart from that, you're talking about the odd child ballad that might be as old, but that's it. That's about it. As much some total of what we know.
I'm just looking at. Sorry, I'm just before we go there. I'm just looking that up. Fox and the Grey Goose. That's Roud 131. So I
Okay.
might get there in about 2030 or 2031
Well,
maybe or something.
you won't have me talking about it in that case. I'm 77. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, that the 1549 thing there, the Complaints of Scotland. So it was old. They described it as an old song. Even then, there was these shepherds were singing old songs and
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
having a party sort of thing. And so that's uh, the frog came to the mill door. Um, while I'm on, I might as well just mention that we were talking about the popularity of the song overall. And I looked at the Roud Index, and there are over 1,000 hits on the Roud Index. If you want to compare that with something even more popular, although I don't think there's many others would come much near that, but you've got Barbara Allen, of course, which is the ultimate most popular song, and that comes in at over 2,000 hits. Anyway, also in that same century, we have again. These are just titles we're talking about, but we're pretty certain. Everybody who's ever done any research into it is pretty certain that these are the same song. They're all the same song. So you've got the London Stationers Register in November the 21st, 1580 has a song titled "The Extravagant Marriage of a Toad and a Mouse," and in another place it's described as "a most strange wedding of the frog and the mouse," and that was licensed to Edward White at Stationers Hall, obviously a London printer. So that's our next hit on it. Neither of those have we got an actual text to or tune. They're just titles that are mentioned. But that's the first printing of it as far as we know. Shortly on the coattails of that is the actual version first printed version in Ravenscroft's Melismata.
Ah, and we came to this in Ravenscroft, didn't we? When you were on for the three Ravens.
That's right. Yeah, there were about half a dozen of the songs that were printed in Ravenscroft publications that have gone into oral tradition.
That's right. And we had and Steve Roud mentioned Ravenscroft and one of the other books in that three
Yeah,
book series,
Deuteramelia.
Deuteromelia, because we had the Baffled Knight at the beginning of this season,
Yeah,
and that's in there. So yeah, I like that. Yes, Ravenscroft and those books are cropping up now in our podcasts.
yeah. I've got the copy. I've got the Ravenscroft Melismata 1611 copy here, but I think I haven't written it down. But I think there was something before that, slightly before that, about 1605. But certainly, it was 1611 in Melismata. Number 21, The Marriage of the Frog and the Mouse. And the chorus in this is, oh, while we've got this one, uh, I'm going to be using the term ecotype. Have you come across that before?
I have not.
Right, okay, well, it's an American researchers thing that I've picked up over the last 10 years or so. People like Bob Walsh with the traditional ballad index use it to
All
describe.
right.
It's used to describe. Let me give you an example. The song "Unfortunate Rake" and the Streets of Laredo and all. Each of those different remakes of a particular ballad have their own autonomy and are referred to by some people, at least some researchers and academics, as ecotypes. It's come in from biology, I think, studies.
Okay.
So the term ecotype refers to would refer here to the half a dozen or more different formats for the froggy. So I'm going to be using that term ecotype to describe that. So the first one, the ecotype for the Ravenscroft one, which is the first text that we've got, has its own particular tune, which I don't know because I don't read music, but it's probably quite different to many of the other tunes that are available. It has a humble dum second line refrain and a tweedle tweedle twino fourth line refrain, obviously repeated right through. Um, and that seems to have been very influential on a whole stream of versions of ecotypes that have come through from that time, from 1611, right through to the modern day, because you've got, I think, things like the hum hum, the America, even the American versions, and very often with any of these ballads, some of the American versions that you come across, I'll be referring to that in the next talk that I do on the Bruton Town, where the Americans have got by far the longest versions, have preserved the longest versions of that particular ballad. And it's similar with some of these sort of from 1611. That's carried on. Although obviously the Ravenscroft printing was anthologized and carried on being printed in music books and things like that right through the centuries. So there is a good reason for it to have been widespread. But you get the things like in Bear Ives version, for instance, Froggy went according and he did ride hum. Froggy went according and he did ride hum. And the hum is probably a derivation of the humble dum, which is the second line in the 1611 version.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll move on fairly quickly from one ecotype to another and through the ages. But do stop me if you want to ask any questions on any particular period or version. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. The next thing to point out is quite relevant to your acquisition of a Durfey's Pills to Purge Melancholy.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So we're now jumping, well, yeah, jumping a century, possibly, yeah, jumping a century here. Obviously, the song carries on in print and very likely in oral tradition as well. But what you've got here is quite a different chorus. So obviously there are other choruses being developed during the 17th century. In fact, I'm coming back to that with a different type that must be 17th century as well, a bit later on. But this is in volume one of your six-volume set there,
I'm holding it right now. I'm trying to look it up.
right? And it's page 14, if you want to have a look. And it's called The Ditty on a High Amoor at St. James's, set to a comical tune.
Oh, there we go. Great Lord Frog to Lady Mouse. Croakledom he, croakledom ho.
Yeah. Dwelling near St. James's house, cocky me chary she, rode to make his coat one day, in the merry month of May, when the sun shone bright and gay, twiddled, twiddled, come tweedle twee. Now then, if we look back to the melismata version, the last line is tweedle, tweedle, twino. So there is some, connection between the two songs there, yeah.
And that's got 9 verses, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it obviously is written about specific characters in St. James in London. And that leads me on to a lot of theories that are about the ballad in general, even dating back to 1549. Various people have put forward theories, some of them put plausible, that the actual, it's an allegory. The song as it stands and going back as far as you like was always an allegory, and it was an allegory of a king going off to court a wife and horrible things happening. And it's been applied to Henry VIII in one instance, and it's been applied to, I think, Queen Mary being involved, Mary Queen of Scots, I think it was. And coming back, it has also been applied to more recent monarchs as well, which of course that would be in retrospect, because obviously we know it's at least 16th century, middle of the 16th century. So that would be in retrospect, like this particular one we're looking at, this parody, if you like, that's a skit on some local people.
Since you've said that you can't read music, shall I attempt on off the hoof to
By all
sight
means,
read
do
this?
so. Yeah, have a go.
Okay, let's see what we're doing with the words and the tune are not, they're underneath each other. They're not like linked together. So
No,
I'm having to dart between 2 bits.
Do a la la
Great,
la.
great Lord Frog to Lady Mouse, croakledom he, croakledom do, dwelling near. Oh, I see. Right. Okay. I understand what's going on. Take 2. We won't do an hour of me trying to sight read this, but great Lord Frog to Lady Mouse, croakledom he, croakledom ho, dwelling near St. James's house, cocky me, cocky me, chary she. Road to. This is actually quite tricky. Road to make his court one day in the merry month of May, when the sun shone bright and gay. Tweedledum-dee, Tweedledum-dee is Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Tweedle come, tweedle twee, something like that. That was pretty abysmal. That was pretty abysmal on my part.
That was very, very impressive, considering just about every other note is modified, sharp or
yes.
flat. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, moving on swiftly. Right, so we've got Scott. Coming back to the melismata version. So Walter Scott, which is there, it is, yeah. So Walter Scott had a manuscript version in his possession, dated 1630, and apart from it being in Scots dialect, it's almost word for word the melismata version. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
probably just a Scots translation of Melismata, quite
Sure, yeah.
simply, yeah. Right, okay, what we're going to come to next then? Right, yeah, okay. The Rigdon versions. Now, I've checked. I can't find either a traditional recording of this anyway. That's not to say there isn't one. What I'll do is, just so that people know what I'm talking about, I'll have a go at a version I think. I first came across this version after having heard sort of American versions by Bell Ives and people like that for many, many years. When I first got interested in English traditional music, Jim Eldon was a resident at our club, and he
Oh, yeah.
sang this. And I've spent all day looking through Jim Eldon's recordings, and he hasn't damn well put it on a record. He hasn't recorded it. So I'm going to have to sing a bit of it. I'll just sing the first verse just so that people know which eco type I'm talking about. And this is quite a different eco type. Um, we we can't take it back as the Froggy all that far. Probably only about the middle of the 18th century. But anyway, this is the version in Peter Kennedy's Folk Songs of Britain, and it comes from Adolphus Leruez of Bon Nuit, Jersey, recorded in 1956. And I think it's so close to Jim's version. This is probably where he got Jim probably got it from. Anyway, this is how it goes. There was a frog lived in a well with a ring-dum bully-dum a coy-me. A merry mouse lived in a mill with a ring-dum bully-dum a coy-me. Coy-manero, kill-kill-caro, coy-manero, coy-me. Plim-slim-slam-a-diddle, I'm a bull-a-ring-tum a ling-dum bully-dum a coy-me. And obviously there's a lot of verses, 18 verses to that one. But it's my favourite, to be honest, of all the Froggy different formats and the different eco types. And I've got another version of it somewhere here that takes it back. Now I can take it back first of all to about 1785. I've got it on the Book's Delight, containing the following new favourite songs. That's just a advertising ploy. Doesn't mean that they're all new songs. And song number 20, it's a songster. It was sold at the printing office, Little Russell Court, Drury Lane in London, obviously. And it's song number 20, and it's called The Frog's Courtship to Mistress Mouse. Obviously, this is much older than the version that I've just sung from, but I'll have a go at singing this particular version because it's slightly different. There was a frog lived in a well with a rigdum bottom in a kino, and there was a mouse lived in a mill with a rigdum bottom in a kino. Kaimanero, kiltakero, kaimakero, kino, strim stam panadiddle ladderbone lingtum, rigdum bottom in a kino. And again, there's not quite as many verses as Rodolphus had, but that's the earliest version I've got of it as a mouse song. But
But
well, have you got any comment at all on that chorus? What do you think of the chorus?
uh
Difficult? It's a
yes.
it's a tongue twister, isn't it?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Would you say that they're all sort of nonsense syllables, like in Whack-Fall the Diddle-I-Do and stuff like that?
Is this a trick question? And it
It is
sounds
a
like
trick
it sounds
question.
like
Yeah.
sounds like it is, but in fact they actually mean something.
Yes, they do. They
Okay.
they are. Uh, Having gone through 18th century, the Echo collection, 18th century collection online, which you have to subscribe to, but somebody sent me some copies who shall remain nameless. His initials are SR.
Okay, yeah.
Uh, and I found in there an old. Well, now let's have a look where that is. Yeah, oh, here it is. Yeah, if you want to know a lot more information about the history of this one, by the way, I've got a paper on the dung beetle things on Musical Traditions website, on all my articles on on various different songs that have a long history, and this particular ecotype, the Rigdum Bullidum Acoimi one, I've written an article on there. So if anybody wants to know the full background and history, because there's a lot of history attached to it actually. But to come back to where it came from, the all of that seemingly sounding nonsense syllables there were all they're all camp cant. You know what cant is?
Uh, Enlighten us.
Yeah, so it's it's the specific slang language used by a particular group of people. So you get travellers cant. They use a particular words, have their own words for various different things.
Right.
And in this
Okay.
case, it's camp cant, and the version I've found lots of different versions of it online in various different places, mostly to do with what shall we say, rugby songs or bawdy songs. And
Right.
this one's quite bawdy, and I'll tell you what the song is about, but I'm not. I'll try and sing it using the same tune because there's a pretty good chance it had the same tune because it's got almost the same chorus. A milkmaid going out of late with a rigdom for a little game. Oh, to see the camp it was her fate with a rigdom for a little game. Gamey orum, wildum gorum, gamey wildum game. Can you net a flummerum, a rigdom bollerum, rigdom for a little game?
I
And all of that
see. Yeah.
is camp cant. Now that's soldiers' camp, the army. In the old, well, right up until World War Two, in fact, used to gathering their recruits, used to have set up big camps on open spaces with tents and things for training purposes. And one of the big places was during the Civil War, the English Civil War, was Bullington Green, right next to Oxford, and that's the Bullydom bit. That's Bullington Green, famous for Boris Johnson having lurked there at times because it was used by the university students as well when there wasn't a war on. A place to go gathering and chat birds up.
Right. Okay. You just
Uh,
lowered the tone considerably with
we
that
have,
anecdote. With
yeah,
that
yeah.
anecdote,
Well,
Steve.
you can't lower the tone much lower than what this ballad is about, actually, because it's about all the prostitutes at the camp, at the army camp, and what they get up to, and the dancing, and all of those words in that. I'll just go through that first verse again. A milkmaid going out of late with a rigdom for a little game. A rigdom is related to up to the rigs, down to the jigs, up to the rigs of London town, and you
Oh
know
yeah,
what that's
yeah.
all about, yeah. So you got a rigdom was the same thing as that. To see the camp, it was our fate with a rigdom for a little game. Well, you're on the game, you know what on the game means. Gamiorum, wildum, gorum, again, cant for naughty goings on. And then can you net a flummerum? Flummerum was like flummerty, sort of light-hearted things going on. Flummerum, rigdom, bollerum. I think bollerum is that's the it is explained on the website, so I haven't got there, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. And then rigdom for a little game again. So that chorus that in that ecotype of the Frog and the Mouse came from these camp cant, these soldiers cant, and all those words have a meaning that are in the chorus.
Well, I'm sure that song brought the house down back back in the day. I'm not sure
Yeah.
it have the same effect now, perhaps, but certainly, at one point.
Oh, now one thing I didn't tell you is that came from a sort of early 18th century broadsheet, but it's obviously referring to the Civil War period because the last verse actually says, "'Tis like to be a roundhead." The girl's liable to get pregnant. It's saying, "It is like to be a roundhead brat, but Oxford, pray you look to that." and that's when this area was being used as a camp for soldiers, was all during the 17th century. And into the 18th century as well. But so that ballad, obviously, even though the version I've got here was printed in the 18th century, it was obviously written in the 17th century uh, during the Civil War, in fact. So
Right. Yeah.
so anyway, coming from that, we can move on to the next. That's number four, Rigdon. Yeah. Music book. Yeah. In Notes and Queries of 1876 gives a music book version very close to the Froggy Chorus, circa 1750. So that's another version again of that particular ecotype. Now then, moving on, any sort of questions on those ecotypes we've done so far?
No,
If
no,
not,
no. I'm enjoying listening to it all. It's fine.
right, okay, right. Well, we'll come on to Jess's particular song then, which is, funnily enough, even though it's over 200 years old, is probably the most recent ecotype, the most recently made one. Um, I think it's a pretty good bet that it was made up no earlier than about 1790, maybe as late as 1800. It was printed, and I've got a copy here somewhere. Yeah, it was printed on a broadside by Laurel, oh, what's it now? How's it gone? Lorien Whittle, who printed sort of upmarket broadsides. I'll show you that one. They can't see it, obviously, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
the type that have a great half of the sheet is covered with a great big woodcut, detailed woodcut. Referring to the song that's underneath it, and the song is "The Lovesick Frog," and it's the song just sings, "A froggy would a wooing go, hey ho," said Rolly, the one we all learnt at school, in other words.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the point that it is that Jess sang it on an album of kids songs.
Ah, right.
It's the album she did with Richard Arrowsmith. The album was called "Off We Go Again," and it's their second album of nursery songs, rhymes, and lullabies. So,
Ah, right. Yeah, well, I mean, nearly all of the versions at some point have been, well, apart from perhaps that Ligdum Bullidum McCoy one, nearly all of the ecotypes that we have at some point been referred to or used as nursery songs, or they've sort of dropped down to that level of nursery
yeah,
songs.
I guess that's to be expected when it comes to animal songs.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the nonsense aspect of it as well as the
Of
animal thing. Yeah,
of course,
yeah.
of course, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, what we got? This one was printed in 1808, and it says "The Lovesick Frog," sung with great applause by Mr. Liston of the Theatre Royal, Covent Garden and Company. Set to music by Mr. T. Croge, I think it says, and sold by Golding and Co. So it was on sheet music very much at that time as well, and it was very very popular. I mean that's around about 1800, and it was in the repertoire of some of the most esteemed performers around at that time. Liston is quite obviously he's performing at the Theatre Royal, Covent Garden, and at the same time the most famous clown ever. Joe Grimaldi, he sang it as well, and his great thing was pantomimes. He was the master of pantomimes for 30 or 40 years, around about 1800. And he in all the London big theatres, and he sang it, and it lasted very well. I mean, obviously, it's lasted up until today for various reasons, but it was also sung by Sam Cowell, and he didn't start singing in the music halls in England until about 1850, having come back from America, having toured in America. And so Sam Cowell, it's in his book of songs, is that version, The Lovesick Frog, as well. There has been some speculation about that, which again, I don't ascribe to any of this speculation. It is all just that speculation. The song says, "Hey ho, says Rolly. Aho said Anthony Rowley, and Old Rowley was King Charles the Second, I think. Yes, Charles the Second. And so
Okay.
uh, a lot of people have speculated that this has been rewritten as again as a political jibe at Charles II. But Charles II obviously spent a lot of time in a certain country. Uh, and his courting things, apart from the men he courted, the women he courted, anyway, that there has been speculation about that. I don't want to go into too much detail. Right, that's the Lovesick Frog. What other things? That's covered sort of more or less the history of the song. There are lots of other types. What I intended to do was to, at some point when I get time, which might be next year, have a go at every single version and try and at least sort out the half a dozen or so ecotypes so that you can say these are all of this type, the lovesick frog type. These are all the Rigdum Bullydum type. These are all the Hum Hum type, of American ones, and do
Yeah.
something with that. Um, I don't think Steve would consider giving them separate Roud numbers, but the thing is with Roud numbers, if there had been a possibility at the beginning, and this is, hindsight is a fine thing, putting eco types with
Yeah.
different letters on, like Malcolm Laws did with various songs.
Oh, so you could have had like Route 16C and 16D and
Yeah,
that sort
exactly.
of
That's what I
thing.
mean.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's probably one subset too far, I think. I think one is enough. Or
Probably.
none is enough, I think. Yeah.
It would only please us nerds.
Indeed. I think yes, might annoy some people. But nevertheless, it's fascinating stuff.
Right. Well, what else can we say about the song? That's the history of it, more or less.
Fine, fine. Well, we can move on to some versions then for the traditional singer versions.
Right. Well, I mean, I was looking through mainly Norfolk like yourself today and looking at all the different ones. Um, I didn't have time to see which ones were which eco type, but I mean, there are singers' names cropping up there that are, you would drool over. Cecilia Costello, for instance, sang it.
That's right. We spoke about her at length when you and I did the Cruel Mother episode on the last season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, it was lovely. Things that she said about it, exactly sort of what I thought as well.
Yeah, because she had it on was it the same? I'm just looking for it. The same LP, I think.
It'll have been on the musical traditions CDs, I would think.
That's right, and the leader LP as well, from 1975, called that was called The Frog and the Mouse, and she was recorded singing that in January of 1954.
Yeah, yeah, and there's Bess Cronin as well. She sang it. I mean, presumably both are Irish versions.
Oh yeah, because obviously, yeah, Cecilia Costello was Birmingham, but nevertheless,
Irish. Her father was Irish.
Irish or Irish, yeah. And Elizabeth Cronin from County Cork, Frog and the Mouse. She was recorded singing that in for the BBC in August of 1948. But the version I could find, there's a version of her singing it on YouTube that's a 1951 recording of her singing. I wrote the name down. Uncle Rat went out for a ride, which is if you look at the words, it's the same song, but it's a
Oh yeah,
different sort of
obviously.
format, and that was an Alan Lomax recording from 1951, and that came out on a CD
I
in
don't think I've got any recordings of her actually. I've got the book. I've got Bess Cronin's the book Sun wrote.
yeah. There was a 2021 anthology of Lomax recordings that came out in 2020.
Oh yes, I saw the reference to that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so that's got the recording of Elizabeth Cronin singing "Uncle Rat Went Out for a Ride." So that's I've yeah I quite like that one. I've listened to that one this afternoon. I thought it was rather good. And yeah, I've The thing is, there are lots of mentions of other traditional singer versions, but I can't. I've not managed to track down any recordings of them, which is quite irritating when I want to play some of them in the in the episode
Yeah,
break.
yeah. A
So
lot of the references on mainly Norfolk are for quite old sort of versions,
yeah,
and
although there's mentions of Rod Stradling's musical traditions label releases, and a couple I don't
oh, yeah,
have. So
they're all still available. And veteran ones are all available.
that's right, because there's a woman from North Carolina, Hot Springs, North Carolina, called Maud Long.
Ah, right. That was one of the others on my list.
There
Yeah,
you go. And that was A Frog Went a Courting, recorded by Maud Carpelese in 1950. And that's on the musical traditions release, When Cecil Left the Mountains.
that's the one. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
I've all
either
that down.
I either do have that, or I will download it for £2 from the musical traditions
All right.
website,
Yeah.
because that's what they were running.
I like to have the actual plastic.
Well, so do I, and I don't, for some reason, I'm not sure we have that one. We've between me and my dad, we've got like 95% of them, and there's like occasional ones that seem to have slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, I'm about like that as well.
So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think I don't recognize that title, but anyway, I'll try and get a copy of that anyway. Um, and you mentioned Adolphus LaRue. Uh,
yeah. That was recorded by Peter Kennedy. Yeah.
that's right. There's a clip of him singing that on the on that volumes of stuff that we don't like, or I don't like. The folk songs of Britain, that 10 volume.
All right. Yeah, yeah.
The
Mm. I've only got about five of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and the volume 10, it's on there. That, for anyone who doesn't know, that's where Peter Kennedy sort of made one track out of every track is made out of four or five different versions of the same song. So you get like two verses from one singer, then the next two verses of the same song from a different singer, and he tries to compile a whole track, a whole song out of different versions, which is academically quite interesting, but as a listening exercise, it's pretty appalling. Anyway, you can hear a bit of Adolphus LaRue there on volume 10 of that.
All right. You'll get the tune and the chorus from it then. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because he compiled one, two, four versions: Adolphus LaRue, Elizabeth Cronin, Annick Patterson from Orkney, and Albert Beale of Kent. And so, yeah, I will play some of that maybe in the episode break as well.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get my hands on the Packy Manus Burn version.
Oh yeah, Packy Ben. That was another one I'd put on the list.
Was it? Yeah, because Packy Burn,
You just about said all the list I'd got
yeah,
anyway.
that's fine. Packy Burn recorded it on his 1969 album on the EFDSS label, the album called Packy Burn, and it's there. And I'm going to try and track down a copy of that because I adore Packy Burn's singing.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, you're a great fella. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I'll mention some of the more modern recordings with Jess later on. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'll try and play. I'll definitely be able to play Cecilia Costello, Elizabeth Cronin, and Frida Palmer because I've got those, and probably Adolphus LaRue. I'll see what else I can find.
Yeah. Mm.
But yeah, I think that's a good lot of recommendations on that side as well. Um, we could call it to a halt there. I think if
Yeah.
that's
If you've got enough there, yeah.
I think so in general. So lovely stuff. Thank you very much for that. We're going to see you back in 2 weeks' time for 2 weeks' time for your next thing. And yeah, looking forward to that. That's the song Bruton Town, which we'll come to in 2 weeks' time. But in the meantime, Steve Gardham, thank you very much.
Ah, you're very welcome.
A huge thanks again to Steve Gardham for providing us with the history of The Frog and the Mouse. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now are snippets of A Frog He Went a Wooing Go from Frida Palmer, Uncle Rat Went Out to Ride from Elizabeth Bess Cronin, The Frog and the Mouse from Cecilia Costello, and A Frog Went a Courting from Maud Long.
A froggy would a wooing go. Hey ho, said Rowley. A froggy would a wooing go. Whether his mother would let him or no. with a roly-poly gammon of spinach. "Eh-oh," said Anthony Rowley. So off he sat with his opera hat. "Eh-oh," said Rowley, and on the way he met with a rat, with a roly-poly gammon and spinach. "Eh-oh," said Anthony Rowley.
Uncle Advent to the right, kitty alone. Uncle Advent to the right, kitty alone. Uncle Advent to the right, sword and buckle by his side. To make axe me carry the Cunadil, kitty alone. Lady Mouse will marry me, kitty alone. Lady Mouse will marry me, kitty alone. Lady Mouse will marry me, ask my uncle Rat, said she. Make axe me carry the Cunadil, kitty alone.
There was a rat that lived in a well, oh, ransom did it, and a merry mouse in the mill rattled the dairy. Oh, Lady Mouse, are you within? Oh, ransom did it, oh, yes, kind sir, I'm learning to spin, rattled the dairy. Froggy went a-courting, he did ride, Froggy went a-courting, he did ride, sword and a pistol by his side, Rode right up to Miss Mouse's door, Rode right up to Miss Mouse's door, where he never had been before, Said, "Miss Mouse, won't you marry me?" Said, "Miss Mouse, won't you marry me?" Not unless Uncle Rat will agree. Uncle Rat went a-running down to town, Uncle Rat went a-running down to town to buy his niece a wedding gown.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums from which they came in the show notes. On to the second half of the episode, I spoke with singer Jess Arrowsmith about Roud 16, The Frog and the Mouse. Well, hello, Jess Arrowsmith.
Hello, Matt. Delighted to be here.
Great. Well, as am I, delighted to have you here, because this is, as we all know, this is season 2 of the podcast, and I did season 1 in over the summer, from like May, I think it was, through to mid-July, and I was prepping the podcast for approximately 6 months before that. From the very beginning of the year, I remember having a couple of Zoom meetings, one with Steve Roud and one with someone else in January of this year, 2024. And I was chatting to a few people and about it. And then in March of this year, I wasn't taking part in it, but I did turn up to your Melrose Quartet's Raise Your Voice singing weekend for the sessions and stuff. And I remember as it was all winding down on the Sunday afternoon, I cornered you and mentioned that I was doing this, and you said it sounded really good, which was a good thing to hear. But also, I hadn't really booked or asked anyone to be the singer for season 1 yet, but I did know that you had sung this song and recorded it in the past. So I did say, if I get to season 2, would you like to be on as this one? And you said yes. Therefore, you were the first guest I asked to be on it, and the first guest who said yes, because you said yes straight away. So, for that reason, I am very, very delighted that you are here as well.
Well, it is a great honour.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Busy, as ever. Seem to spend all of my time doing admin for all of the things that are coming up, but that's a good thing. So, yeah, lots going on.
Yeah. Yes, as I have found out with the podcast, it's like most of our work on the folk scene tends to be like 80% admin and 20% the actual work.
Oh, yes.
For each season of the podcast, I do have to have up to like 15 or 16 email conversations in prep, and it's all the same questions. It's what dates can you do? And, it's to record and stuff. It's the same conversation I'm having with about 16 people all at the same time to prep each season of the podcast. So it's interesting. But yeah, as I said, it's most of our work tends to be admin, and the work is like the most important bit, but also the bit that takes the least amount of time.
Yes.
Which is Yes.
That's such is life.
Right then. So here we are. Roud. It's Roud 16. We're now in the, as I've probably mentioned in my in between segments bit. With this is the beginning of the second half of season 2 already with Roud 16. The Frog and the Mouse. Before we do the Frog and the Mouse, though, to tell us a bit about yourself, your sort of musical upbringing, your history with folk music. Did you find folk music, or were you brought up with it, or did it find you? What's the story, Jess Arrowsmith?
Well, somewhere in between, I suppose. My dad ran folk club when he was a student. There was always a lot of music in our house, folk and otherwise. My dad plays the guitar. He now plays bagpipes, but he, at the time when I was a kid, played guitar a lot. And so, grew up listening to him playing Bert Jansch and Leonard Cohen and that sort of thing. And we lived in the Northeast when I was little, and my mum and my sister did step clogs. So there was always stuff. And then we moved to near Whitby when I was 7 and started going to Folk Week. And so from when I was about 11, that was the highlight of my summer. And I'd spend a week trotting around Whitby with my fiddle, going to all of the workshops and all of the ceilidhs. Funnily enough, it was more the dance and the playing side of things that got me into it at that point. And although we always sang for fun, at home and in the car and that sort of thing, never really occurred to me to be a singer as such until a little bit later on. And we had a ceilidh band once I had got, big enough, when the first band I was ever in was with my dad and our friend Sue. And we were a little ceilidh band that did, local weddings and barn dances and that sort of thing. And then I came to Sheffield as a student, joined the Sheffield University Ceilidh Society, played for lots more ceilidhs through that. We started our own ceilidh band, Hecate, which is still going strong, but also started singing a bit, was in a band, a very briefly lived band with Simon Haywood called St. Ursula and the 11,000 Virgins, which did approximately 1 gig ever, but it's a great name for a band.
That is brilliant. I love band names like that. One of my favorites is a band from the 1970s or maybe the 80s that John Kirkpatrick and Sue Harris had that lasted 2 gigs or 4 gigs, and they were called Knocking Nelly and the Sperm Whale Boys.
If you put so much effort into a band name, then sometimes you don't really need to gig. It's just, you've done it now. So
it just needs you need to know that it did exist. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But that got me into the idea of singing in front of people, which at the time I found absolutely the most terrifying thing. I mean, this was when I was sort of 19, 20. I used to shake like a leaf. But then towards the latter part of being a student, started playing music with Gav Davenport, along with, obviously, I should mention straight away, Richard, my other half. We were playing music together from the first moment we got together, really, as teenagers, because we were some of those sickening people who got together very young and still are. Very much an ongoing musical partnership and in every other way. So we started playing music with Gav and singing with Gav as a trio, and then later with his wife, Helena, as Crucible, and started gigging properly at that point. And that was the point where I started singing a lot more, to people rather than just for fun at home by myself. And yeah, that's where it all started, really.
And so you say you were playing fiddle from quite an early age?
Yeah. I started having lessons when I was 5. I was one of those slightly probably odd children, a little bit precocious, a little bit opinionated about everything, and apparently had decided that was what I wanted to do and told my parents, aged about 3.5, that's what I want to do. And so, yeah, they got me a fiddle, and I had classical lessons to start off with because that was what was available. But I mean, I mentioned we moved to Whitby when I was 7. For a while, I had lessons from this amazing old guy called Mr. Wammond. I don't even know what his first name was because it was all, he was probably in his 70s and I was 7. I was slightly terrified of him. But he always used to make me play by ear. At the beginning of every lesson, he'd say, play me something bilug, as in by ear. Later on, turns out that he was a dance musician as well. You know, he used to play for country dances, you know, the old school EFTUS, you know,
Wow.
social dance stuff. And that's actually part of what he had done his whole life. But I had no knowledge of that at all. He used to make me play scales and classical pieces and stuff. And as I say, I was a bit terrified of him. I actually think I owe a vast amount to that bit where he was making me not play off the dots, because so many people who learn classically get kind of so tied between what they're looking at and what comes out of their fingers. And actually, if you can let go of that and just play the music that is in your head, it frees you up so much. And being pushed to do that when I was 7, 8, I suspect had a big effect on me. But yeah, at the time, I just thought it was really scary.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. I had. I don't play it much anymore, but I learned violin from the age of 5 as well, and with classical lessons. So all the dots and stuff, and that was all it was. Because there wasn't a bit about playing by ear. It was just classical lessons at school, and so it was read what's on the page. But then I did grow up in a folky household, and seeing people playing without dots, and so I think I have no memory of thinking, oh, I should try and do that as well, play without the dots. But I've come very adept at it over the years, as we do in the folk scene. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, and yeah, I remember trying to recruit some musical friends of mine when I was in my teens into a sort of folk band, but my friends who were on my music A-level course with me, and they're all very classical violinists, and I said, well, I want you to play something about that, and they had to get me to write out bits that they wanted that I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And I said,
it's a different thing. I've done a lot of teaching over the years, and teaching workshops for fiddle players, festivals and that sort of thing. And I have to confess that the times that I've most likely reduced people to tears in a workshop, completely inadvertently, obviously, is asking somebody to play a tune by ear, to learn it, a little bit at a time, but to learn it by ear, if they are the kind of person whose brain goes from reading the dots into what their fingers do. And for some people, it's quite traumatic. The first time I reduced somebody to tears, I was absolutely mortified and quite traumatized myself, because it was like, oh my God, what have I done? These days, I try quite hard to not make people cry, to be fair. But I'm less phased if somebody does get quite sort of upset by the process, because apparently that is what it does to some people's brains. It sort of causes panic if that bit's taken away, which was a complete revelation to me that it could do that to people. But there we go.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah, I guess some of that it's very much a feel thing, as well as a separating the kind of what on the dots on the page, but also so much playing of sort of folk-ish things compared to classical-ish things is a feel and a stylistic thing. A classical player might, for example, if given the sheet music for a jig, for example, a tune in 6/8, they're going to do those quavers as da 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 da, whereas what we want is duck da duck da duck da.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you can't. That's not really. Sorry, this is getting into musical notation terms for some people, but it's duck da duck da. It's not. But if you wrote out that as like a dotted quaver, a semi-quaver, and a quaver, that's not what we mean either.
No, it's somewhere in between, isn't it?
It's somewhere in between, and it's so hard to explain that it's a feel. It's feel rather than changing how long the notes are.
Yeah, and that's so true for folk song as well, isn't it? So, I mean, I actually do way more singing teaching than I do fiddle teaching. And so often you'll be looking at a song where it's in a folk song book, and it's got the tune written out with the first verse of the song, and that fits because that's what's been written out. And you get to the second verse, and then it's like, how on earth do you fit the words to the second verse to that tune that's written? And again, if somebody's coming to this from outside of the folk world and is used to reading the dots as they are written, it's almost impossible, because you look at it and go, well, they just don't fit. And actually, as a folkie, you look at it and go, well, that written notation is a sketch of kind of how the tune approximately goes. And now I'm going to completely hack it into a different shape to fit the words in the second verse. And oh, look, I have to do it again in a different way for the third verse because the phrasing's different. And that's what I love about folk song is it's so fluid. It's so free to put your own interpretation, to put your own personality almost into what it is that you're doing, even when it's an ancient song that's been in existence for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a vehicle to express yourself to a certain extent, and you've got that freedom. But yeah, from what's written in a book, it's not always obvious, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And there's never, because we're all kind of making it up as we go along with folk music, really, in terms of how we write stuff down, how we apply things to it, is that there's no set way of writing out of how to write out the melody of a song in terms of how you get what you mean across in the set of dots. I will always come back to like some songs that are ostensibly in like free time when you sing it, there's no kind of set time signature or no beat rather. You can write. There's a thing of, do you write it out as if it's got a beat in 4/4 or something, but then you change the length. You put like a 6/4 bar in because the next line actually goes on for potentially 2 more beats if it did have a beat, or not. So because what I tend to do is I tend to write it out in. I think if I was transcribing something like that, I would tend to write out the tune in the closest time signature to what it might actually be, but then use pause marks. Whereas I know some people in books will just write it in 4/4, but when you get to a note that might be a pause, they put in the time signature for the bar it would be if you were counting the pause in beats.
Yeah, I think I sometimes do one of those things and sometimes do the other one, depending on what I'm writing down. But yes. And then if you look at some of the old archive, notebooks and stuff from stuff that was written down a long time ago, I think the fashions in these things change as well, don't they? But some of that early written down stuff, they don't even put bar lines in. So they've written down the notes, but you don't really have that sense of the phrasing and where the pulse would be because they haven't written it down. And I doubt that it was because they were singing it without any sense of rhythm. It was more just that they were writing down again. It's a sketch of what the tune might be.
And I guess they were writing it down as the singer was singing it to them. So it's a very quickly drawn dot, 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 rather than, oh, that's a crotchet, that's a quaver, there's the bar line. You haven't got time to do that while someone's singing it to you.
No.
So, yeah, unless you ask them to sing it 3 more times, I guess.
But would they do it the same every time?
Well, and there we come to something else, Will they sing it the same thing every time? I know people who do, and I know people who don't. And yeah, that's a whole different kind of world.
And I probably think that I sing it the same every time, and then you listen back and go, oh, no, well, you don't then, do you? So who knows?
Yes, I tend to sometimes stick to what I think is rigidly to what I've learned, and then I've heard a recording of myself from 10 years ago and go, oh, I've changed that word, let alone the tune.
No, I do that all the time.
Hadn't clocked that I'd changed that word. But yeah, I think when I write things up, I tend to go with the pause mark because it implies a pause rather than, oh, just hold that note for 2 more beats than you otherwise would do. I think adding, I can cope with reading stuff that's written in different time signatures for different bars. But I think in terms of getting across what the singer meant, I think a pause mark is more helpful.
Yeah, I think, it depends on context, doesn't it? Quite often when I'm writing stuff down, it's because I'm arranging it in parts for a group to sing, at which point actually giving them a nice free pause isn't very helpful because they've all got to leave it the same amount of time.
I guess that then relies on the conductor, or the leader, the group leader, rather than anything else. I think if you're doing it for if you're writing out for a choir or a group of singers, then the bar lines are more helpful and the different time signature bars. But if you're transcribing it up for let's say, a book of songs that's more of an academic thing rather than a practical use thing, I think the pause mark is more helpful in that
Yeah.
context, I guess.
And when I write stuff down for myself, if I'm learning a new song and I just want to catch hold of the thing, I don't even write it down with dots on lines. I write it down with numbers just to capture what the notes are, like relative to the scale that it's in. I've sort of made my own set of notation for that just because as a shorthand, I find that much quicker than worrying about doing its dots. But that doesn't give you any sense of timing at all. So
Indeed. So there's no set way of doing this.
No.
And it's like trying to work out, this is a total side thing and we won't go into it, but how do you write out sheet music for melodeon in players that involves telling you which button it's on and which finger to use? No one has a set way of writing that out. And so
No.
every single melodeon tutor book is different in terms of its layout. And anyway, here we are, the frog and the mouse.
The frog and the mouse. Yes, let's talk about.
So yeah, yeah. This is something I ask everyone, although I know the answer because you told me already, but our listeners don't. Do you have? Are you able to pinpoint an exact moment as when, not necessarily the version you sing now, but the song in general came into your sort of consciousness when you were first aware of this song in general, the frog and the mouse, Froggy went to court in, etc.
So for this particular song, that's a really interesting question because it's a children's song. And I learnt it as a child through osmosis. So no, I have absolutely no idea when I first came across this.
That is fine. That is as good as answer as any.
I think that's always going to be more true of children's songs, isn't it? Because I don't remember at what point I will have heard it. I know we had an LP of nursery rhymes and children's songs that wasn't folky at all, but that we used to, my mum would put it on when I was probably before I'd gone, was even at school. So when I'm talking really little, 3, 4, 2, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know what I remember from that age. So who knows? But this song was definitely on it.
It's one of those songs you just always knew, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we were looking this up before we started the recording that Tim Hart and Friends did it on one of the many Tim Hart and Friends nursery rhymes, sort of nursery rhymes sung by folkies LPs. And I think I certainly had one, but I can't remember if it was that one or not. And so
yeah, I mean, he recorded this in 1983 on Drunken Sailor and Other Kids' Songs and called it Froggy's Courting. But it did get then included on one of the compilation versions of his kids' CDs as well, or LPs particularly at that point. So yeah, and obviously a lot of folkies grew up listening to Tim Hart doing that sort of thing. But yeah, loads of people do seem to have recorded this because there's, well, as we've heard from Steve already, there's so many different versions of it.
Absolutely, yeah. Steve gave us a very, very in-depth history side to this, far more information than I knew about the song anyway. Dating back to, I think he said that the earliest one we could trace back is 1549.
Yeah, I had no idea. When I knew this as a child, and then when myself and Richard set out to do a CD of children's songs, basically because we'd had a baby and I was singing to her loads, and then that sold really well. So we were like, oh, well, second baby. Well, let's make a second CD then. And I think we recorded this one on the second CD on Off We Go Again. But yeah, when I was sitting down and like writing my short list of songs that was going to go on to that CD, I had no clue that this was such an old piece of writing. It was just, oh, here's a song that I remember that was fun from when I was a kid. Let's do that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing to suddenly find that a nursery rhyme you've been singing for years is in Pills to Purge Melancholy.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about a lot of, particularly nursery rhymes as well. People get very fixated on, the history of it having all of these deep, dark roots, such as, for example, the one that they always say is about the plague and isn't at all.
Ring of Roses.
Which,
yeah, Steve Roud talked about that in the first season.
Yeah, which, you look on the internet, which is, of course, full of the most amazing amount of misinformation in the world. And there's all these people going on and on about, it's definitely about the plague and this bit of the words meant this. And then, you talk to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and they're like, nah, there is no evidence for that whatsoever.
That's amazing, that kind of thing. And actually, I haven't mentioned him for a few episodes. My all-time favourite singer, Gordon Hall, traditional singer from Sussex, did actually write a song about the plague that included a Ring a Ring a Roses chorus, because that he believed that he had this. He wrote it about 25 verses, but there's a recording of him in an interview singing 3 verses of it, and he got this. I can't remember. It goes, in the village of Eyam in Derbyshire, da 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 da, and each verse is about another person who got killed by the plague, sort of thing. Da 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 da. Sing a ring a roses, a roses. Sing ring a roses. Tissue we all fall down, which is a great chorus for
Fabulous
a song,
chorus.
but it's about the plague and the 16 whatever it was, and yeah,
Historically, massively inaccurate, sadly.
yeah, indeed. But when has that stopped? Never let the truth get in the way of a good song.
Well, true.
There is that debate as well. But yeah, so all these theories about that Steve was saying about the song being like based on, or like, you know, to do with like royalty and kings and stuff, and there's, you know, we there's only so much we can speculate about this stuff. You know, we can't know for certain.
No, unless somebody at the time wrote it all down and said, I wrote this song and I meant this by it. And of course, nobody's written that down, have they? So who knows?
Exactly. But then you do get parodies that are deliberately about.
Yeah.
But it's whether the original song was meant for that purpose as well, in terms of who it might have been about.
Yeah. And does every song need to have some deep, dark meaning? Could it not just be that somebody thought it was funny that a frog and a mouse might decide to get hitched? You know, it's just a silly idea that makes a fun, slightly nonsense song, doesn't it? So
exactly, yeah. Actually, yeah, this might be a pro of nothing, but I was just, I wonder. This is one of those speculations. I wonder if so and so heard this song before they wrote. But maybe Kenneth Graham had this in his mind when he started writing "The Wind in the Willows," or not, probably.
He's got that sort of feel, though. I know what you mean. It's that sort of, you can imagine these little creatures who you see out in the wild, but then with all of their clothes and stuff on, you know, the little frog with his opera hat on, and absolutely, I can imagine one of those little sort of watercolor illustrations of that, totally like the Wind in the Willow sort of feel.
Yeah, because although this song, most versions of this are the frog and the mouse, but there are some versions which are rat rather than mouse.
Mm.
And there is the recording that I probably played 10 minutes or so ago on the podcast of Elizabeth Cronin, Bess Cronin, the Irish singer, traditional singer, singing it, and that she had it called "Uncle Rat Went Out to Ride." And so I think sometimes there's rat instead of mouse, or rat instead of frog, maybe, but and then there is in "The Wind of the Willows" frog. It's toad, isn't it? My analogy's getting all mixed up. But... Well, you got a frog toad-like creature and rat, and then you got badger and whoever else, and so there's probably no link apart from they're all animals. But in my head, I like to think there's something there, maybe. You know?
Yeah. I mean, the version I sing has the frog and the rat featuring far more heavily, really, than the poor old mouse who gets, you know, they don't get to her house until about verse 4. So,
oh dear. So, I think Steve was saying that the one that you sing ends up being one of the most common versions. I think the most regularly, so. The hey ho sing ovie and the spinach and all that lot.
Yeah, So it doesn't surprise me that it is one of the most common. As I say, I remember this from an LP of nursery rhymes that wasn't folky or anything. That was just kind of probably standard children's songs that. I don't know even when that recording was made, but I would have been listening to it in the late 70s. So it could have been any time, sort of 50s, 60s, 70s recorded, I guess. And yeah, it was just one of the popular children's songs. But you look at all of the versions that are out there, and there's some more American versions that are out there, and it's not one of those, but it is, one that seems very common. And the tune was the thing that had stuck with me. The tune and the kind of the first verse, so the gammon and spinach bit, was the bit that had stuck in my head from being a kid. So when we decided to record it, I literally just Googled the words and pulled together a set of lyrics from, my first 3 hits on Google as to what verses I would want to sing, something that made a coherent song that wasn't ridiculously long. And yeah, having looked back at it since, that seems to be a fairly common set of lyrics. But as you say, from what Steve was saying, it's only one of the many strands of this, and it's one of the later ones, which was a surprise to me. I mean, I had no idea until listening to Steve talk about it that this was such an old song. I had no clue whatsoever. I would have, if I'd have been asked, I would have probably gone, oh, well, maybe it was like Victorian or something. But it's clearly way older than that, which I think is rather lovely.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? And I was just thinking while you were talking then about how, because one thing I didn't actually, or I'm going to be totally honest, the day we're recording this, it's 2 weeks since I recorded Steve Gardham's half. So although we're referring to it a bit, I have recorded several podcast segments since then, and my brain's a bit frazzled as to what he said or what other people have said in other podcast things. So I can't remember if he actually mentioned where what the Anthony Rowley link is, because your version has Anthony Rowley,
Yeah.
and whether that was a real person at one point, or how far can that version be traced back?
I have to confess that although I did listen to the interview with Steve all the way through, I don't recall whether he said that either.
No, I don't think he did. I'm just looking at other people who have recorded it to see if anyone's got any sleeve notes that mention Anthony Rowley.
It's very specific, isn't it, to name somebody by name like that? But
yeah,
no
we
idea.
know that there was Baring Gould collected a version of the Froggy Went Courting Anthony Rowley version from a guy called Sam Phone in Loudon. At some point, I can find the name of the date of that in 1892.
Okay,
there you go, and you can, and there's the a PDF page facsimile of the manuscript of that page is on the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library Archive. Although I can't read that handwriting at all. I can just about tell that says there was a frog lived in a well, Chucker something, Doxy, Kitty alone. And so, there's some words there that I can't quite read because Baring Gould might have been a doctor or something, for all I know, with that handwriting. But it must mention, someone's gone through and transcribed it properly, so it must mention Anthony Rowley in there somewhere. But so that's a version collected in 1892. And they've written in the book as sung by his mother in around 1840.
Yeah.
So
Anthony Rowley has been a long time there then as part of that song, whoever he was.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to do. Might mention that to Steve Gardham. And yeah, see. There was a frog lived in a well. That's right. And Sabin Brengel collected that 1892. And that was found, and that's all found in the Plymouth and West Devon Record Office, if you really want to know that sort of thing.
Wow.
I love the amount of information you can find on these things sometimes.
There's so much, isn't there?
Right. But yeah, so yeah, it's fascinating that, because that's a very specific name. And so that one thinks that must have been an actual person at some point.
Well, do you know, it might not have been, though, because so often the chorusy bit of this and so many other songs is, nonsense syllables, isn't it? The kind of ring-dum diddlum dee kind of stuff. And actually, it's a children's song. People can just make up absolute bobbins and sing it because it fits to the rhythm of the thing. They've got roly poly, so somebody Rowley. It doesn't need to be a real person. This
is also true. This is very true from that point of view. Yeah, it could just be a made up thing. You got Frida Palmer. It's this pretty much. Or I know you've got quite a few more verses, but more or less the version you sing is kind of what Frida Palmer, Oxfordshire traditional singer. Frida Palmer, because that her version. Yeah, Frida Palmer had a frog he would woo and go, hey ho, said Rowley. A frog he went to woo and go, whether his mother would let him or no, with a roly poly gammon and spinach, Hey Ho, said Anthony Rowley.
Yeah, that's
And
what I
so-
sing too. So
Yeah, and so Frida Palmer, Mike Yates recorded her singing that in 1977. So that's there. And Rod Stradling wrote the sleeve notes for that. What would you have said about it? The children's song was but the remaining stub of a satirical ballad, which probably dates back to at least the mid 16th century. So yeah, all this stuff about it might have been. He said that Sigmund Spaeth, if that's how you pronounce that surname, has a note claiming that the original version was supposed to refer to Francois, Duke of Anjou's wooing of Elizabeth I of England. Or, yeah, we could choose to believe that.
yeah, but who knows? Well, it then in the same paragraph, it then says that the Wedderburn text, which at least anticipates the song, predates the reign of Queen Elizabeth by 9 years and Queen Mary by 4. So if it refers to any queen at all, it would seemingly have to be Mary Stuart. That feels an awful lot like somebody wanting to kind of retrofit some facts to a song, doesn't it?
That's right. This is the sort of thing you get in TV cop shows about corrupt cops who are trying to you use the evidence to fit your theory rather than the other way around.
Indeed.
And so there's lots of theories, but at the same time, it's not really.
Little concrete evidence, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes I end up thinking, who cares?
It's a good song, though. It's a good, fun one to sing.
Yes, that sounds slightly contradictory with me having this podcast to do the history of folk songs and then going, well, actually, who cares?
But we care, but we like to speculate.
And sometimes that speculation should be left unheard, probably sometimes, But yeah, it's all interesting, and then we leave it up to everyone and their individual selves to believe what they believe. This is anyway, yeah. I was going to say something political. I decided not to.
Very wise.
Very wise. So in terms of you just put together the version you sing is basically you found on the internet, and was it one version you found, or is that a cobbling together of a few to create a longer song?
So no, it was pretty much as is, and to be honest, when I've looked again since, because we're talking 11 years ago or whenever it was that I recorded it, so I don't quite remember the process, but having known that I was going to come and talk to you about it and gone back and had another little look online, if you put Froggy Would a Woo and Go or the Gammon and Spinach Hey Ho said Anthony Rowley bit into your search bar, it's the words that I'm singing that most commonly seem to come up. I'm sure if you searched for it by some of the other titles, if you actually went and searched for Froggy's Courting, then you'd probably get the American one, Froggy Went a Courting Ho Hum type version instead. So, they're all out there. But because it was the Froggy Would a Woo and Go that was the title that I used for it, was the bit that I remembered, that's what's come up. And yeah, it's pretty much the same words that you were just mentioning as sung by Frida Palmer seem to be the ones that are out there pretty much whole. And that is what I chose to sing rather than trying to do anything particularly artistic, mainly because we were putting together an album of children's songs. I think we put about 40 songs on our CD because children's songs often are really short. So, I mean, this one's actually a decent length song. But, if you're going to record Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, that lasts all of about 12 seconds. So you need quite a lot of songs. And when you're recording, it takes almost as long to record a 12-second song as it does to record a 3-minute song because it's all the setup and the faffing that takes the time. So actually, we very much just were kind of here it is, bang, 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 job's done, rather than agonising about every single track, because what we wanted to do was make a CD of nursery rhymes that parents might not hate. That was my main aim with my CD project there.
But a very good aim to have, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And so, are you playing fiddle on this as well on the thing, or is it? I assume Richard's playing
Richard
melodeon.
plays box. I think I just sing, and then we had lots and lots of guests who we came to add interest and sparkle to our CD. And on this particular one, we had John Bowden singing the choruses as well, and possibly playing something. Do you know? I can't remember. I'll have to check my sleeve notes and see what went on what track.
Well, mainly Norfolk has all the listing of who's on what track and what instrument.
Well,
And
there you
no,
go. So we
Bowden,
can probably
it's
find out.
tracks. Hey, look, it's Route 16 and it's track 16 on your album. How's
Oh,
that?
amazing.
It's as if you knew that was a thing, but you didn't. But nevertheless, that's an alarming coincidence, I must say.
Isn't it though?
It just says John Bowden vocals. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So I think it was just Rich playing and me, and I sang lead all the way through, and John sang on the choruses. So
Oh, it doesn't say track 16 for Richard Arrowsmith Melodian. Oh, it doesn't list the Melodian tracks. He's probably playing on everything.
he played on
All the way
literally
through.
everything all the way through.
Okay,
pretty much.
that's why it doesn't say track. So
Yeah.
it would have been him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Well,
we only listed the guests because otherwise, again, because it had so many tracks, there's only so many pages
yeah.
on a booklet.
Sure, of course.
Most of the
Yes,
booklet was taken up with the lyrics of the songs because I wanted it to be like a practical thing for people with kids. So I put all of the words in the booklet, but that means there wasn't really time to write anything about the songs. It's just like, these are the words if you want to sing along.
Yeah, exactly. And because I say, as I now live in Sheffield, I've been living in Sheffield for almost 9 years, but now I live in Sheffield, I do recognise every single name on your guest list on that album.
Well, mostly it was all of our mates who had kids at the same time as us. So
yeah. And that was 2 years before I turned up in Sheffield as well. So
yes,
I didn't know people then, but I better listen to this album. I very much want to hear James Fakin's impression of an old woman.
oh, that track's fabulous. Yes, he did all of the sound effects for that particular one. I can't. What's the name of the track? I've forgotten that.
27. That's old Roger is dead. Roud 797.
Well, if you're still doing this when you get to 797, Matt, you can get me and James to come and talk about it.
That will be in something like 30 years' time.
Well, if we're still alive and we can still remember doing it, then you can ask James about doing the sound effects for that, which included, as well as being an old woman, he was the wind, and he made the sound of the wind by blowing through a lampshade. So, you know, that we had so much fun recording those albums. There was lots of bits with animal noises as well, and various different people lining them up in a studio and going, now make the noise of a duck or a monkey or whatever. You know, it was just so much fun.
Yeah, I have been in the audience at a gig of yours when you got the audience to do some animal noises. I was the pig.
Oh, well done.
That was I think that was your encore at Royal Traditions in Tungworth.
I think it was, wasn't it?
And we went around the audience and did the I went to market to buy or something.
Yes. Which we went to Warwick Festival this year with Melrose Quartet, and Keith Donnelly does a ridiculous performance-related competition every year where he gets festival artists and, you know, his mates to do songs on a particular theme, and then the audience votes which one's best. And this year the song theme was kids' songs. And so we, as Melrose Quartet, did I Went to Market, dressed up as various different animals, and getting the whole audience to join in and getting guests to come up. And then we were disqualified for overuse of the word cock, because it's I went to market to buy a cock, but he said it wasn't family friendly enough. And we only meant like a cockful, cock-a-doodle-doo.
Yeah.
But it meant that we didn't place, despite I was the hottest I've ever been on stage, because it was a really, really hot, sunny weekend at Warwick this year. And we were in a marquee, and I was wearing my daughter's fluffy winter pajamas because I was dressed as a sheep. I'd made myself some papier-mâché horns and borrowed these fluffy white pajamas, and I have never been so hot.
Wow. Blimey.
It was very entertaining.
Well, you know, it's all fun and games.
What we do for our art. What I do for my art,
sure.
anyway, if you can call it art.
I was just looking at the track listing for that Kids album, Off We Go Again, that this song is on. I'm amazed at how many Roud numbers there are. Obviously, some don't have Roud numbers. You've got Out on the Pussycat and the Hippopotamus Song and Teddy Bear's Picnic, Sunshine Mountain, etc. But if we go through it, you got let's go through them all. Rider Cock Horse is Roud 19,639.
Okay, I think we'll all be dead by the time you get there.
Well, if I do this for 40 years, I'll only get to Roud 1,200. But nevertheless, the Patreon exists, and that's where songs from further on in the index can be covered.
Okay.
Mary Mary Quite Contrary is Roud 19,626. Old King Cole, you've got 1,164. And Bobby Shafto, 1359. Knick Knack Paddywhack, 3550. Pop Goes the Weasel, 5249. Isn't that great? Old MacDonald Had a Farm is Roud 745. And one of our regular contributors, Vic Gammond, the podcast, has done an entire article for the Folk Music Journal, on the history of that song.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I'll send you it. It is rather extraordinary about how far this song goes back.
Wow. My favourite version of that is our friend Martin in Sheffield sings it in Latin.
He does indeed.
And he does a marvellous job, and it's very, very funny.
Old MacDonald is Taverwick Fundum, E-I-E-I-O.
That's the one.
It is rather excellent, I must say. But yeah, Route 745 is something I'll get to, 30 years' time, but because I know that Vic has done all the research, I do want to include that on the Patreon. And obviously, I would like to have you back in the future to do some non-children's songs. You might get the call.
Other genres of song are available.
Yes, but I know you've recorded Old MacDonald, so you might have to do that one as well.
Sure, whatever.
But we'll see. Polly Put the Kettle On, Round 7,899. All in the Wood, Round 129. I'll be getting to that in about the summer of 2028.
Wow.
So that's relatively in our wheelhouse. 129 though, because that's versions of the Tree in the Wood, the Tree in the Valley,
Rattling Bog. It's the same.
Everlasting Circle.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rattling Bog has a different route number.
Does it though? Because it's basically the same song. I mean, it's different words and a different tune, but it is basically the same song.
Yeah. Rattling Bog. I'm just looking it up now. Bog. No. Beg your pardon. Yeah, 129. It's the same song.
Same one. Yeah.
So there we go. Rattling Bog, and you got Michael Finnegan has a round number.
Does
Isn't that
indeed?
Fantastic? What 10,551. Which is excellent. And then Froggy Would Win Go, 16. Old Woman Tossed Up in a Blanket is 1,297. Jack and Jill, 10,266. Here we go round the Mulberry Bush, 7,882. Hey Diddle Diddle, I assume that's the Cat and the Fiddle song, 19,478.
Yeah.
Old Roger is Dead, round 797. The Jolly Miller, 503. Nearly at the end, folks. Fox Jumped Up, 131.
Oh,
because that's just Daddy Fox. That's versions of old Daddy Fox and stuff.
Yeah.
In about 2029, I'll be on that one.
Sure.
Patter Cake, round 6,486. Bonnie at Morn, of course, 3064. And Lavender's Blue, 3,483. And one broadside number as well, because in the Roud Index, all the songs are numerically going forward, but there's the broadside index as well. So anytime you find a Roud number that says Roud V and a number, is the broadside index for songs that have been found on broadside ballads, but not in oral tradition.
Okay.
We've not found in oral tradition.
Interesting.
And so Golden Slumbers has Roud V 18,483.
Interesting.
And the list on Main in Norfolk, it includes Eliza Carthy, The Unthanks, You, and the Beatles. Apparently, Paul McCartney based the first stanza vaguely on the original Thomas Dekker poem Cradle Song, which is where it all stems from. So there you go. You're in a list with the Beatles. You can retire now.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think they would be aware of that or care.
No, quite so. Anyway, yeah, we've talked for quite a while. Anything else you want to mention before we come on to our recommendations section?
No.
No.
I'm utterly bamboozled by how many children's songs have Roud numbers now, but I suppose that
Yeah.
shouldn't be a surprise, should it, really?
No, it shouldn't actually. It's more. It's just not something we never considered before, really. But there's a lot of them.
No, I mean, to be absolutely honest, that project of recording nursery rhymes really was such a fun thing to do because they are such little songs in terms of like the length of the song and quite often quite simple concepts because you can't put loads of complicated dark ideas into something that you're trying to sing your child to sleep with. But there's so much scope. But well, obviously, yes, you can, but it depends whether you want to give them nightmares. But there's so much scope for different versions and having fun with it that actually that as recording projects, both of those albums that we made were just an absolute delight to make, and they have been two of the best-selling things that we ever recorded, certainly of our duo stuff, even though we don't actually tend to perform them. There was a while where we did a kind of a live children's show version as well, and we do sometimes still get asked to do that, and it is quite good fun, but in some ways it's a lot of kind of mental work to try and get it out because it's different material than we're normally performing, and because each song is short you have to have a lot of them, and if what you're trying to do is do a show for 0 to 5-year-olds, then actually you can't just stand up and go, oh, here's a lovely song and sing a song. You have to kind of put quite a lot of effort into being a children's entertainer as well. So it's a very different thing than the other types of performance that we do. So actually we don't tend to do it very often, although it's always fun when we do. But yeah, in terms of as actually making the CDs, they were an absolute hoot to make. So
I'm sure, yeah. And linking it to me because you know I can, it very tangentially. You said that was the second album which you made because you had a second child, which is your son Will, who has the same birthday as me.
He does.
And
All the best people have birthdays in November, though, Matt, because my birthday's the day after.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Happy birthday for last week.
Yes, indeed, and to you. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. There we go. Yeah. Right. Let's bring it back to this. Yeah. So recommendations then for some other, because we had some traditional recommendations earlier, Cecilia Costello and Bess Cronin and Frida Palmer. Who have you got to? So
I mean, we've already mentioned Tim Hart. Frankie Armstrong recorded this in 1972 on her album Lovely in the Water.
I mean, Frankie is such a great singer.
Oh God, yeah, amazing. Yeah. One of the absolute greats and such a huge influence on so many people. So yeah, she recorded it as The Frog and the Mouse. Much more recently, Jeff Warner released an album in 2018, which had a frog who went to courting on that. So the much more American version of it. But yeah, I love Jeff Warner stuff as well. So definitely worth
so good. Definitely, I'm going to reach out to him. I want him on the podcast at some point. If anyone have been listening to the podcast throughout the episodes, Jeff Warner's been mentioned once before, but quite a few times on episodes where the historical guest and I have mentioned some American collected songs. Jeff's parents did, Frank and Ann Warner did quite a lot of song collecting in America, and we've mentioned, I think usually Brian Peters, because he's very good on American versions, has mentioned Jeff Warner's parents quite a lot, and so that's the link there to Jeff Warner. So I think it'd be great to have him on at some point.
No, you should.
And his version, the one he sings, was collected in the mountains of Kentucky in 1917 by Cecil Sharp.
Wow.
So
there we go.
There we go indeed. I will mention some, we'll do some folky ones and then some non-folky ones. I always like when some non-folky ones come up, and these ones are particularly varied. But first, American one again, Sarah Gray, brilliant singer. Sarah Gray sang this on an album back in 1998. She said it was an Irish version of a very old children's song learnt from a singer in County Fermanagh, a woman called Annie Mackenzie. That's called The Frog's Wedding. So I always highly recommend Sarah Gray's version of anything because it's always brilliant. Sandra Kerr, the great Sandra Kerr, mother of your Melrose Quartet cohort, Nancy, recorded this on an album of children's songs. There you go, in 2009 called Hi Said the Elephant, which also includes previous podcast guest Emily Portman from 2 weeks ago. She's on that album singing some stuff, but Sandra's always good value. And then we'll also mention, we'll keep it in-house for the podcast, Andy Turner, who was on last week's episode as the singer guest for the Cruel Ship's Carpenter. And we talked quite a lot then about Andy Turner's A Folk Song a Week project, which was spawned out of the John Bowden's Folk Song a Day project. And in April 2019, week 280, Andy included the song King Kong Kichi Kichi Kimio, which is a version of this from Harry Smith's Anthology of American Folk Music, which is I think is a 6 LP collection of stuff. Something to get our hands on at some point.
Absolutely.
So Andy Turner, brilliant, as we've heard from last week. He is brilliant. And then, of course, a proper shout out to you and Rich and the album Off We Go Again from 2014. And then we come to some more interesting ones. Bruce Springsteen recorded this song. He recorded it called, it's the last track on an album he made, Froggy Went A-Courtin', as we'd expect, one of the American ones. That's the album he made in 2006, called We Shall Overcome, The Seeger Sessions. And it's a whole album of 13 songs made popular by the activist and folk musician Pete Seeger. And I'd really recommend that. If anyone hasn't heard of that one, highly recommended. I mean, it's absolutely spectacular album with a load of American songs. You've got Froggy Went A-Courtin', you've got We Shall Overcome, the title song, you've got Shenandoah, John Henry, Mary Don't You Weep No More, Old Dan Tucker, all that sort of thing. And it won the Grammy for Best Traditional Folk Album.
Oh, how about that?
So there you go. I mean, it's a really great album from 2006 called We Shall Overcome, The Seeger Sessions. Bruce Springsteen singing Froggy Went A-Courtin'. And the final, I got 3 more ones to mention because these are all linked with puppets. We're going to mention The Muppet Show.
Hooray!
Because, I love The Muppet Show dearly. And this song, as far as I know, was performed twice in season 3 of The Muppet Show. Season 3, episode 1, it's all on Disney+. Other streaming services are available, but not if you want to watch The Muppet Show. Rolf the dog sang it on season 3, episode 1 of The Muppet Show, possibly with Sam the Eagle, I think. I think they both, certainly Rolf the dog, but I think Sam the Eagle might have been there as well. And then season 3, episode 22, Kermit the Frog sang it with that week's guest, Roy Rogers. And amazing. So good. I can't, I'll go back and watch them again now. And tangentially, in a Muppet Show themed thing, it was also included in the Judy Collins episode on season 8 of Sesame Street as well. And because of the character, the Grouch in Sesame Street, she sang 3 Grouches would a wooing go. So it changed it for that purpose. But that's what we do. We edit things for purpose on the folk scene, and it's great. So there we go. I love it when that sort of thing happens. So we've got Frankie Armstrong, Tim Hart, Jeff Warner, Sarah Gray, Sandra Kerr, Andy Turner, Jess and Rich Arrowsmith, Bruce Springsteen, and then Kermit the Frog, Ralph the Dog, and Judy Collins and Roy Rogers.
Magic.
What a great list of recommendations for a song that goes back to 1549, if not earlier.
Absolutely.
And I think I'll put the links to all those in the show notes as usual. Right, I think we've my stopwatch says 59 minutes 50 seconds. I think we better
call it then, hadn't we?
I think we'll call it to a halt. a recording engineer once said to me, you don't finish making an album, you just call it to a halt. And that's usually true, I think. You could tinker for however long. Anyway, this has been really brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Not at all. It has been a delight, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, you were my first person I asked and the first person to say yes, so I'm very grateful to you for this, and consequently providing encouragement about doing the idea of this podcast in the first place.
Well, I think it's a lovely thing you're doing, and it's got some really, really interesting gems of information that I certainly wouldn't have come across otherwise. So yeah, well done.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I'd love to have you back at some point. Obviously, because you did those 2 albums of children's songs, you are in a unique position that you have recorded them, and therefore some of them will be turning up on the podcast. But it'll be great to have you on for some, I say, actual folk songs, some of the more what we would classify as more general folk songs, ballads and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I would be delighted.
So, yeah, great. So we'll sort that out in the future. But for the time being, Jess Arrowsmith, thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye. A froggy would a wooing go, hey ho, says Rowley. A froggy would a wooing go, whether his mother would let him or no, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. So off he set with his opera hat, hey ho, says Rowley. So off he set with his opera hat, and on the road he met with a rat, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Pray, Mr. Rat, will you go with me? Hey ho, says Rowley. Pray, Mr. Rat, will you go with me? Kind Mrs. Mousey for to see, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. They came to the door of Mousey's hall. Hey ho, says Rowley. They came to the door of Mousey's hall. They gave a loud knock and they gave a loud call, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Pray, Mrs. Mouse, are you within? Hey ho, says Rowley. Pray, Mrs. Mouse, are you within? Oh yes, kind sirs, I'm sitting to spin, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Pray, Mrs. Mouse, will you give us some beer? Hey ho, says Rowley. Pray, Mrs. Mouse, will you give us some beer? For Froggy and I are fond of good cheer, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Pray, Mr. Frog, will you give us a song? Hey ho, says Rowley. Pray, Mr. Frog, will you give us a song? Let it be something that's not very long, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Indeed, Mrs. Mouse, replied Mr. Frog. Hey ho, says Rowley. Indeed, Mrs. Mouse, replied Mr. Frog. A cold has made me as hoarse as a dog, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. Since you have a cold, Mr. Frog Mouse, he said. Hey ho, says Rowley. Since you have a cold, Mr. Frog Mouse, he said, I'll sing you a song that I have just made, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. But while they were all a merry-making, hey ho, says Rowley. But while they were all a merry-making, a cat and her kittens came tumbling in, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. The cat, she seized the rat by the crown. Hey ho, says Rowley. The cat, she seized the rat by the crown. The kittens, they pulled the little mouse down, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. This put Mr. Frog in a terrible fright. Hey ho, says Rowley. This put Mr. Frog in a terrible fright. He took up his hat and he wished them good night, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. But as Mr. Froggy was crossing a brook, hey ho, says Rowley. But as Mr. Froggy was crossing a brook, a lily-white duck came and gobbled him up, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley. So there was the end of 1, 2 and 3. Hey ho, says Rowley. So there was the end of 1, 2 and 3. The rat, the mouse and the little froggy, with a roly-poly, gammon and spinach, hey ho, says Anthony Rowley.
That was Jess Arrowsmith singing The Frog and the Mouse. That brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on various social medias. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm still on Twitter there, but it's probably winding down as there's been a mass exodus, it seems, and there's now a new In The Roud account over on the social media Blue Sky, which a lot of people seem to be pouncing upon these days. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky for the time being. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. And if you'd like to support the podcast in a financial manner, you can. In The Roud now has a Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/intheroud, and for either a £5 or £10 per month subscription in support of the podcast, you will receive weekly bonus episodes, mainly focusing on other songs from further on in the Roud Index, or also episodes on other areas of folk song, including collectors and singers. So far, we've had a 3-episode Singer's Choice mini-season with special guest Nancy Kerr, focusing on 3 songs of her choosing. And we've also had a Collector Spotlight episode, looking at the life and song collecting work of Sabin Baring-Gould, and my guest for that, I was joined by Martin Graeber. This week's Patreon episode is the introduction to our next regular, and in this case annual, strand of episodes, all on Christmas carols, with a particular focus on local and traditional carols. This week I'll be joined by local carols expert Ian Russell to give you an episode as an introduction to local carols, with particular reference to the traditions in Sheffield and Derbyshire. After that, there'll be 4 weekly episodes, each on a different traditional or local carol, to take us through to a break over the Christmas period. Hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Steve Gardham and Jess Arrowsmith. Join me next week for episode 7. We'll be looking at Roud 17, which is the song The Three Butchers. My historical guest will be Steve Roud, and my singer guest will be John Looms. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in The Roud.